Welcome to Hidden Betrayal Confessions. Let's get started with today's story. I didn't think anything was wrong at first. If anything, I thought things were getting better. My wife had been going to therapy for a few months, and I remember feeling relieved about it. She seemed calmer, more thoughtful, like she was finally working through things she never talked about before. And honestly, I supported it. There was even a point where she started quoting things her therapist said. Small insights, little observations about relationships. Some of them even made sense. But then, something shifted. It wasn't obvious. Not something you could point to right away. Just the way she looked at me sometimes. Like she was analyzing me instead of being with me. At the time, I told myself I was overthinking. I mean, therapy was supposed to help, right? What I didn't realize was he wasn't just helping her understand our marriage. He was slowly becoming part of it, and I had no idea how far it had already gone. Before all of that started, our life was actually pretty normal. We'd been married a little over 9 years. Nothing flashy, nothing perfect, but steady. The kind of relationship where you don't question things anymore. You just live in them. We both worked full-time. I handled most of the finances. She managed a lot of the day-to-day stuff at home. Weekdays were predictable, mornings were quiet, evenings were routine. Dinner, a bit of TV. Sometimes just sitting in the same room doing different things. And that was enough. We weren't overly affectionate, but we weren't distant either. There was a kind of quiet understanding between us. The kind that builds over time. Looking back, I think that's why I didn't notice anything sooner. There was no obvious problem to point to. No major arguments, no big emotional gaps, just life. She started therapy after mentioning she felt stuck. Not unhappy exactly, just unsettled. I remember asking her if everything was okay between us. She said yes, and I believed her. That was the thing about our relationship back then. I never felt like I had a reason not to trust her. She even suggested at one point that maybe I should try therapy too. She said it casually, like it was just a healthy thing to do. I laughed it off. I told her I didn't really have anything to talk about. She didn't push, but I noticed something in the way she reacted. Not disappointment. More like she already knew something I didn't. At the time, I ignored it, because everything still looked normal. And when life feels stable, you don't go looking for cracks, even when they've already started forming. At first, the changes were small enough to dismiss. She started going to therapy more regularly. Once a week became twice. Then sometimes she'd mention extra sessions if something came up. I didn't question it. If anything, I thought it meant she was taking it seriously. But then, it wasn't just the frequency. It was the way she started talking. She began using phrases that didn't sound like her. Things like emotional boundaries, or unmet needs, or internal narratives. Not wrong, just unfamiliar. And sometimes, the way she said them felt less like she was sharing, and more like she was explaining me to myself. I remember one night, we were talking about something small. I don't even remember what started it. But she paused, looked at me for a second, and said, "I think you avoid difficult conversations because you're uncomfortable with emotional vulnerability." It wasn't what she said. It was how certain she sounded, like it wasn't her opinion, like it came from somewhere else. I laughed a little, tried to lighten it, but she didn't laugh back. That moment stayed with me longer than it should have. After that, I started noticing other things. She became more private with her phone. Not in an obvious way, just more aware of where it was. She'd step into another room to take calls sometimes. Said it was about processing things. Again, reasonable, at least on the surface. But there was also a kind of distance growing, not physical, not entirely. Just a shift in presence, like she was there. But part of her attention was somewhere else, and I couldn't explain why. But I started to feel like I was being quietly evaluated, not loved differently, observed differently. At the time, I told myself it was just part of her growth. That was the word she used a lot. Growth. But looking back, that was the moment something in our dynamic started to change. I just didn't understand what it was changing into yet. I didn't become suspicious overnight. It was more like a slow accumulation of small things that didn't quite fit together. At first, I kept explaining them away. She was working on herself. She was learning new things. Of course, she'd act a little different. That made sense. But then, the pattern started repeating. She began referencing her therapist more often, not just casually, but in moments where it felt personal, like during disagreements. I'd say something simple, and she'd respond with, "That's actually something we talked about in session." We. That word stuck with me. I don't know why, but it did. It started to feel like there was a third voice in our conversations. Someone I had never met, but who somehow had influence over how she saw me. And then there were the schedule changes. Her sessions started running longer. Sometimes she'd come home later than expected, saying they lost track of time. Again, possible. But it happened more than once. And it wasn't just the timing. It was the way she came back, not tired, not drained, but lighter. Almost like she had just spent time with someone she enjoyed being around. That thought didn't sit well with me. I tried to ignore it. I really did. Because once you start questioning something like that, it changes how you see everything. Still, certain moments became harder to brush off. Like the night I walked into the living room and she quickly locked her phone. Or the time I casually asked what her therapist thought about something. And she hesitated. Just for a second. Then she gave a vague answer. That hesitation, it didn't match the openness she used to have. And I remember thinking, when did therapy become something she guarded? At some point, without realizing it, I stopped seeing her sessions as something separate from our life. They were becoming part of it, a part I didn't understand. And the more I noticed, the more it felt like I wasn't just outside of it. I was being discussed inside it. I didn't plan to bring it up that night. It just came out. We were sitting at the kitchen table. Nothing unusual. She was scrolling through her phone. I was finishing up some emails. And I heard myself say, "Do you ever talk about me in your sessions?" She looked up, not surprised, but not entirely comfortable either. "Sometimes," she said. "That's kind of the point." I nodded. That made sense. But something about her tone felt rehearsed. So I asked another question. "Do you talk about us? Or just me?" She paused. Not long, but long enough to notice. "Both," she said. "Why?" I shrugged a little, tried to keep it casual. "I don't know. It just feels like lately, when we talk, it's like you already have conclusions about me." She leaned back slightly, studying me. "I'm not judging you," she said. I'm just becoming more aware of patterns. Patterns. That word again. I took a breath. I get that. I just feel like I'm not part of those conversations. Like decisions are being made somewhere else. She frowned a little. That's not fair. Maybe, I said, but it's how it feels. There was a moment of silence. Then she said something that stuck with me more than anything else. He's just helping me see things more clearly. He. That was the first time she said it like that. Not my therapist, not in therapy, just him. I didn't react right away. I think part of me didn't want to. But I asked anyway. You talk about him a lot. She crossed her arms slightly. Because he's helping me. I don't understand why that bothers you. It doesn't bother me, I said. I hesitated, then added, I just didn't realize how involved he was becoming. She shook her head. You're overthinking this. Maybe I was. That's what I told myself. But as the conversation ended, I couldn't shake one quiet thought. When did this stop being just therapy and start feeling like something else entirely? After that conversation, I didn't bring it up again, not because I felt reassured, more because I realized pushing directly wasn't going to get me anywhere. So I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I started paying attention, not in an obsessive way, just more aware of the details I used to ignore. Her schedule, for example. She always said her sessions were at the same time, late afternoon, usually around 4. But when I looked closer, the timing didn't always line up. Some days she'd leave early. Some days she'd come back much later than expected. And when I asked casually, the answers were always vague. Traffic. We talked longer. I needed some time to process. All reasonable, but the pattern didn't feel random. Then there was her mood. She didn't come home emotionally drained the way I expected from therapy. Instead, she seemed lighter, more energized, sometimes even distracted in a different way, like her mind was still somewhere else. At some point, I noticed something else. She started getting ready before her sessions. Not dramatically, just small things. Changing outfits, fixing her hair a bit more carefully. It wasn't enough to raise an alarm on its own. But combined with everything else, it stood out. That was the moment I stopped trying to explain things away and started asking myself a different question. Not, am I overthinking this? But, what am I not seeing? I didn't check her phone. I didn't follow her. Not yet. I just watched. And the more I watched, the more it felt like there was a version of her life I wasn't part of anymore. A version that only existed during those sessions. And somehow, that version was starting to matter more than the one we shared. The first real answer didn't come from her. It came from something small, almost accidental. One evening, she was in the shower and her phone lit up on the counter. I wasn't trying to check it. At least, that's what I told myself. But the screen stayed on just long enough for me to see a name I didn't recognize. No contact photo, just a first name. And a message that didn't feel professional. Same time next week? Or do you want to come in earlier? There was nothing inappropriate about it. Not directly. But something about the wording felt off. It didn't sound like scheduling. It sounded flexible, personal. I didn't touch the phone, didn't open the message. But I remembered the name. Later that night, when she mentioned her next session, I asked casually, "Is that with the same person you've been seeing?" She nodded. "Yeah." I repeated the name I saw, just to see her reaction. And there it was, that brief pause, almost unnoticeable, unless you were looking for it. "Yeah," she said again. "Why?" I shrugged. "No reason, just curious." She didn't ask how I knew. That was the part that stayed with me. Because if everything was normal, that question should have come up. Instead, she moved on, like she didn't want to look too closely at it. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I had proof, but because, for the first time, something stopped feeling like a possibility and started feeling like a direction. I still didn't know what was happening. But I knew this. Whatever was going on between them, it wasn't just happening inside a therapy room. I didn't act on it right away. That message, it stayed in my head, but I kept doing what I've been doing, watching, waiting, because at that point, I wasn't looking for confirmation anymore. I was trying to understand the pattern. A few days later, she told me she had another session. Same time, same place. Nothing unusual. But something about the way she said it felt automatic. Like she'd said it many times before. That afternoon, I finished work earlier than expected, and for a moment, I considered just going home, letting it go. But instead, I drove. Not directly to the office, just in that direction. I told myself I just wanted to see where it was. That was all. When I got there, I stayed in the car. I wasn't trying to catch anything. I just wanted to understand what this part of her life looked like. About 20 minutes passed. Then I saw her. But she wasn't walking toward the building. She was already outside, standing near the entrance, talking to someone, a man. They weren't standing like strangers, not like a client and a professional. They were close, comfortable. And then, something small happened. Nothing dramatic, no sudden movement, no obvious line crossed. He said something. She smiled, and she touched his arm, lightly, naturally, like it wasn't the first time. That was enough. Because in that moment, everything I had been unsure about started to align. The longer sessions, the change in her tone, the way she said he instead of my therapist. This wasn't just guidance. It wasn't just influence. There was something personal there. Something that had already moved past the boundaries I thought existed. I didn't get out of the car, didn't confront them. I just sat there, watching for a few more seconds. Then I drove away. And for the first time, I stopped asking myself if I was wrong. Because deep down, I already knew I wasn't. I didn't feel angry. At least, not in the way I expected. No sudden reaction, no urge to confront. Just a quiet shift, like something settled into place. I drove home slowly that day, not thinking about what I had just seen, but about everything leading up to it. All the small moments, all the things I chose not to question, and how easily they fit together now. It's strange how clarity works. When it comes, it doesn't feel loud. It feels quiet, almost calm. That night, she came home at the usual time. Same tone, same routine. She asked how my day was. I told her it was fine. And for the first time, I heard myself answering without meaning it. Not because I wanted to lie, but because something had already changed. I wasn't trying to fix anything anymore. I wasn't trying to understand her. I was just observing. She talked a little about her session. Kept it vague, like always. I nodded, listened, but I wasn't really there in the same way. Because once you see something clearly, you can't go back to not seeing it. And the hardest part wasn't what I saw outside that building. It was what it meant. Not just about her, but about us. Because whatever this was, It didn't happen all at once. It grew, quietly, right in front of me, and I let it. Not because I didn't care, but because I trusted her enough not to look closer. Looking back, that might have been the moment I understood something I hadn't before. Sometimes the truth isn't hidden. It's just easier to ignore until it isn't. I didn't confront her the next day, or the day after that. Not because I was unsure, but because I realized something important. Whatever was happening, it wasn't going to be resolved in a single conversation. So I took a step back, not emotionally, but practically. I started separating things. Finances first. Nothing dramatic, no sudden moves, just organizing accounts, reviewing details, making sure everything was clear on my end. Then schedules. I paid attention to when she was home, when she wasn't. Not to track her, but to understand how much of our life had already shifted without me noticing. And the more I looked, the more it felt like I had been adjusting to her changes for a while, quietly, without realizing it. We still talked, still had dinner together. From the outside, nothing had changed. But internally, everything had. I stopped asking questions, stopped trying to reconnect in the ways I used to, not out of resentment, more out of clarity. Because at some point, you realize you're the only one trying to hold something in place. I mean, that realization doesn't make you angry. It just makes you step back. A few days later, she mentioned going to another session. Same tone, same routine. I just nodded. Okay, I said. That was it. No follow-up, no curiosity. And I noticed something in her reaction. Just for a second, she looked at me differently, like she expected something else. A question, a comment, something. But there was nothing. Because by then, I wasn't trying to be part of that version of her life anymore. I was already preparing for what came next, not in a dramatic way, just quietly making sure that when the moment came, I wouldn't be caught off guard. In the end, there wasn't a big confrontation. No dramatic moment where everything came out at once. Just a conversation, a few days later. Calm, direct. I told her I knew. Not everything. Just enough. She didn't deny it. And somehow, that wasn't surprising. What surprised me was how quickly everything became clear once it was spoken out loud, not just what she did, but how long it had been happening. And more importantly, how it started. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't even planned. At least, that's what she said. It developed. That was the word she used. Like it was something that just happened over time. Conversations that went a little further than they should. Sessions that became more personal. Boundaries that slowly stopped being boundaries. And somewhere in that process, she stopped seeing it as something wrong. That part stayed with me, because it explained more than anything else. Not just the distance, not just the change, but the certainty in her voice when she spoke about him. Looking back, I don't think the moment that mattered most was when I saw them outside that building. It was much earlier than that. It was when things started to shift. And I chose not to question it, not because I didn't notice, but because I trusted what we had, more than what I was seeing. And maybe that's the part people don't talk about enough. Trust doesn't disappear all at once. It fades quietly, in small moments, in things you decide not to ask, in answers you accept too easily. I don't regret trusting her, but I do understand something now that I didn't before. Sometimes, it's not about whether something is hidden. It's about whether you're willing to look at it closely enough to see what's really there. And by the time you finally do, The truth has usually been there for a while.